everybody, welcome to our live event. My name is Brenda K.B. Anderson, and I'm a sewist, a pattern maker, a crocheter, a knitter. I like to dabble in all the crafts. And I'm very excited to be here today to share with you guys my new concept for taking old t-shirts that you love very much, or maybe something cool you found at the thrift store, and kind of cutting them apart, putting them back together, and making your own, like, one-of-a-kind Flutter Sleeve Tee. So this is what it looks like. I'm also wearing one here. So the idea from this shirt, this is not a new thing, taking apart things, you know, pulling pieces from other places, bringing them back together, making something cool out of it. When I was growing up, I loved the movie Pretty in Pink, just solely because the main character takes this dress that her dad gives her. He finds it at a thrift store somewhere, and she wants to go to prom, and she cuts it all up and makes something that's really cool out of it. Now looking back at it, I actually like the original dress better, but at the time in the 80s, that dress that she made was super cool, and the idea of it was what I always remembered from that, like, you know, taking something that already exists, that you already have, you know, and making it into something cool. So that's what we're gonna be doing today. I'm gonna show you my process for making this tee. And this is a beginner to intermediate project. So if you are, and really, you know, if things don't go well at first, you can just keep fixing it until it's fine. Because in this project, you're adding pieces together. There's no reason you can't just cut another part apart and add something else on to make it bigger. You're not gonna ruin it. So I don't want you to have any fear in this project. It's gonna be really fun. Okay, so there is a free download, so you can go ahead and download that. What's in this download is basically the directions that I'm going to be going through today. So if you don't feel like taking notes, also this is just as you're working on it, it might be nice to have this so you have all the steps and, you know, all the specifics and the materials and all that, so that as you're working on it at home, you know, you can refer to this quickly and remember the order of everything. You can always come back and watch this video as well too. So, and this is a live event, of course, right now. So hi, you guys. If you want to say hi to me, definitely put that in the chat. If you want to, you know, mention anything that you like to work on. If you've ever done this kind of, you know, taking something apart, reimagining it, putting it back together, or thrift flipping, or whatever you want to call this kind of sewing, let me know. If you're, you know, new also, let me know that too. If you have any questions about what I'm doing or need further explanation, also put that in the chat and I'll try to answer that during this live event. All right, so also, I want to mention too that we've partnered with Sulky, and they have provided the thread for this project, and their threads are wonderful. There's a link for the ones that I used in the download and also in the description. But I wanted to point out that I first used a polyester thread because that's what I'm used to using normally when I'm doing garment sewing. I use polyester thread because I know that they're very strong. But I also wanted to test this out with the cotton thread, and I absolutely love the cotton thread. It was way stronger than I imagined it would be. It was just great. There is a part when we're going to be gathering some fabric together, and that was the one part I was kind of like, should I be using a cotton thread for this? And it worked great. So I highly recommend it. There is a link for that if you want to check that out. All right, so let's see. Oh, Arlene's saying happy Tuesday. Happy Tuesday to you too. And she says hello from New York City. Hi, I'm so glad you're here. And Esther's saying hi to everyone from the Netherlands. Hello, Esther, welcome. I'm so glad you guys are here. Okay, so in order to start this out, we're going to talk about materials because obviously that's really what this is all focused on. So you may already have some t-shirts that you already love and you're ready to cut those up and reimagine those, or if you don't, you can go to the thrift store and find some really awesome t-shirts, and you can shop in any section, like any size, because it doesn't really matter. And you'll see that as we work our way through this process. You can make a larger t-shirt smaller, you can make a smaller t-shirt larger, and you can fit it to your own body as you go, and it's just a really great way to be able to kind of you know, use the things around you and have some fun with it. All right, so you're definitely going to need, you know, whatever you're going to call your focal point tee. So the focal point would be the one that you're going to see in the front here. So this one is this Pokey Lafarge, who's a musician I like. This t-shirt was what I started with on this Flutter Sleeve Tee. That's called my focal point tee, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because that's what I refer to it as in your directions. So that way you kind of know what I'm talking about. So you need to find your main tee, your focal point tee, and then you have to find at least one other t-shirt to cut up and use for the sides. So I used one t-shirt here on the sides. It had like SpongeBob and some other things on the back of the shirt actually. So I'm using it on my front panel here. And then I also used another shirt here. This was a shirt for French fries at the state fair, which is like one of my favorite foods to get at the fair. And I cut that up and used that for the flutter sleeves. So you may be thinking, this looks a little crazier than what I would normally wear. I don't know about this, Brenda. And that's okay, because you can absolutely tailor it to what your own style is. Maybe you have your focal point tee is a gray t-shirt. You can certainly find another gray t-shirt for the sides and for the flutter sleeves. You can even leave the flutter sleeves off if you're not a flutter sleeve type person. You don't have to put them in, that's totally fine. So you can definitely customize this to your own design tastes. All right, so you need a total of 2 to 3 t-shirts. To do this, you're going to need, of course, your sewing machine, and you need to have a capability of doing some kind of a stretchy stitch. I'm going to be showing you with a zigzag today because most people's sewing machines will zigzag. I have all kinds of fancy stretch stitches on my machine, which if you do too, that's great and you can use those, but I just want to show you how it works with just the very basics, just a little bit of a zigzag, and we will be doing a little bit of straight stitching as well in this project too. Let's see, you're going to need some papers because we're going to be drafting a pattern piece, and if that freaks you out, don't worry, it's not going to be as hard as it sounds. You're going to need some way of measuring things, measuring tape, a ruler, you'll need a pencil, and let's see, I think I might have covered all the materials. Oh, some pins also for pinning things together and getting them ready. Okay, so once you find your focal point tee, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to try it on. Maybe you already know how it fits you, but if it's a new one, you got to try it on, put it on your body, and see what the fit is like. Okay, so here's my volunteer over here. This dress form is going to be standing in for my sister, who I'm going to be making this shirt for. So I put all of the circumferential measurements of the dress form to her size. So when you do that, when you try it on, you are going to be looking at a few things. Okay, first of all, how does it fit you? Is it too tight? If it's too tight, where is it too tight? So is it tight across the hips? Is it tight in the waist? Is the bust tight? If you can't even get it on, or if you know that it's very tight, but you don't know how much too tight it is, if you can't just guess, like, if you try it on, you're like, ooh, if I just had a little inch on each side, I'd be good. That's great, then you can write that down. But if you just don't know, then I would recommend just cutting straight up the sides on both sides of the t-shirt to let it open up, and then you can see how much space is on each side. So what you need to know is you need to know how much space, how much extra fabric you would need to add, total in the circumference, or if you'd rather think about it this way, how much you need to add to each side. Okay, so write that down so that you know. Write it down for, if it's a separate amount, write it down for your bust, for your waist, and for your hip, wherever your t-shirt's going to be landing on your body. You can also do some adjustments here too as well, like if you don't like how long it is. For example, this t-shirt is going to be a little too long for my sister, so I'm going to be cutting it off just a little bit. If it is too short, you could add a panel of t-shirt fabric to it. You can do that even before you try it on. That's not really part of my instructions, but I just want you to be thinking about all these things because you can really alter this as much or as little as you need to. Okay, so once you figure out like how much excess you're going to have to add, then I want you to go ahead and mark a couple of things. You're going to mark the bust point. So the bust point is the largest circumferential measurement around your chest. And let me grab my pins here. Okay. I forgot to get my extra safety pins, but I'm just going to use these little quilter pins. So your bust point would be here If this were your body, you'd have a bust point here and a bust point here. Then I want you to move about 1.5 inches at the very smallest, up to 3 inches, depending on the size of your bust, outwards toward your side seam and place your pin there. What this is going to be, what we're marking here is actually where we want the line of stitching to go from the front panel. So for example, on the top that I'm wearing here, where we want that princess seam to go between the black and the green. So we're going to be marking that, and that should go to the side seam of where your bust point is. So I know that the bust point on my sister is actually lower than this dress form, and I should have padded this out for this, but we're just going to have to all just imagine. So I'm actually going to be moving this down to where I know her bust point is. Her bust point is actually down here, and then I'm going to be moving this out about 2 inches and placing a pin here. So about 2 inches to the outside of where her bust point is. And you're going to mark this on both sides. Try to be as careful about, the t-shirt being centered as you can. Look at yourself in the mirror, or, if you have somebody else who can help you, that's great. But we're going to true everything up later, so don't be all stressed out about it, okay? All right, so we've got our bust point marked. You can actually remove the bust point mark as long as you have this sort of modified bust point. So we've moved, 2 inches, or it could be a little less, it could be a little more, just depending on where you want that seam to be. So you're going to move that to the outside. Then I want you to mark the point at which you want the seam where the flutter sleeve comes out. So for me, I like to have about 1 inch of fabric that sticks out from the sleeve to where I want my top to end. So there's about an inch or so past where I want my top to end. So if you imagine where you want your top to end, so on this person, their shoulder is right about here. And so I would put a pin about 1 inch in from there, and that's where the flutter sleeve should be stitched. So that's going to be part of our line that we're going to draw between the front panel and then the side piece. However, I know on my sister's body that her bust point is 1 inch out from where this one is. So I'm putting the pin about 1 inch in from where I want her sleeve to end, and that is where it's going to be the seam where the flutter sleeve is going to be stitched into that seam. Okay, so I've got a pin here, I've got the bust point pin, and then I'm going to put another pin down at the hem where I want the hem to be, and it is the width of that front panel that I want. So normally, for most people, you're probably going to want it to flare just a little bit outward, but everybody has different body types and everybody has different tastes and how they want their clothes to look. This could be something that you go straight down, that's where the pin is. Maybe you want it to angle in, that's where the pin is. It doesn't, this is like wherever you see that color change between the front panel and then the side. Okay, so I want you to put the pin in there. So I know that this t-shirt is just a little bit big up here compared to my sister's measurements, so I'm going to pin this in. So you would only have to pin this in if the t-shirt is too big. I'm going to pin this in just a little bit. So I'm taking about 1 inch out of here for her. So that's going to be a total of 4 inches in circumference. That should be fine. The rest of the shirt, I think, will be fine and fit her just fine. So just at that little point there is what I want to change. But on your top, things might be different. Maybe you are going to have to add some, like we talked about earlier. If you tried your shirt on and it's too tight, make sure that you keep that in mind, that we're going to be adding to that pattern piece. And we'll go through that in a minute when I'm actually drawing up the pattern piece on the table. Okay, so we've got all the information that we need while it's on the person. So we can go ahead and take this off. All right, and then we'll take a look at our shirt on the table. So I'm just trying to kind of get everything all smoothed out so there aren't a bunch of wrinkles between the front and the back panel. And so I can see everything okay. And so remember, our pins are marking where we want that seam to be. So the seam is going to go like this. And at this point, this would be where you want to true up your two sides from each other. And now, you know, nothing in this project is really an exact science because we're already dealing with clothes that have already been made and worn. And a lot of times t-shirts are kind of twisted when people sew them. So you might be like fighting some of those things, but just do the best that you can and try not to worry too much, okay? But we're going to be comparing where the pins are from side to side. And in order to do that, I'm going to try and get these wrinkles out of here. One wrinkle is because I pinned it about an inch in. Let's see. All right. So you can also take a look at where your, like if you have a printed image on your shirt, just, you know, before you cut anything, just think about what you're going to be cutting off. If you need to move your pins out a little bit more, you can kind of, there's a little bit of wiggle room there. But at this point, you're going to want to fold your t-shirt in half and compare where those pins are. You could also measure these. But try to line it up as best as you can. And we'll get, so this one is just a little lower. I'm going to, actually, maybe I'll keep the lower measurement. I'm going to move this down just a little bit here. There we go. So those two are matching. And we'll make sure the bust point pins are matching. They're pretty close. So one is a little bit closer to, this one is moved out a little bit further in this direction compared to this one. So I'm going to just do sort of a, an average between them. So because this one is moved a little further this way, I'm just going to move it in a little bit, like that. And then I'm going to move this one out just a tiny bit, like that. And that looks pretty good. Now they're matching up. And we'll see about these shoulder pins here. Pretty close. I'm just going to go with the wider shoulder measurement there. That looks pretty good. Okay. So now we have basically a plan as to where we're going to cut this shirt. So smooth out your shirt as well as you can. Make sure the hem is matching at the bottom. There aren't any big wrinkles because we are going to be cutting through 2 layers of this all at once. So before we do that, we should mark our line. And now remember, these pins are actually telling us where the seam is going to go. It's not telling us where we're going to cut our fabric. This is extremely important because if you cut your fabric where your pins are, you won't have any seam allowance at all. So that's a whole nother thing. So we're going to be making sure we're cutting to 1/2 inch to the outside of the pins. So I'm going to make a 1/2 inch line right here and right here to remind me that we are cutting to the outside. And you can, if you are a patterner, if you've already done this kind of thing before, you can go ahead and make a paper pattern piece. You know, you can use a ponce tool and trace this all out and make sure it's all even, lay it back down and cut it out if you want to, and then you'll have a pattern piece for future if you want to do this again. I'm not going to do that. This is just kind of the quicker method, which is just cutting this apart. So, and let's see, I have to make sure I make those little marks 1/2 inch to the outside of that pin as well. Okay, and because I took the pin out, I know that I need to make this a little bit smaller here. I'm going to just put that pin back in to remind me of that. So that I don't forget that I'm going to alter that pattern piece a little bit when we get to it. Okay, so at this point, if you have a hip curve, you can use that to create your curved line and just draw it on there. You can be using a washable marker. You can be using chalk like I am. This is kind of like a goofy little chalk pen that I have. But you know, it works really well. Some kind of marking tool, and it is okay to mark the front of your fabric as long as you're pretty sure that that's where you're going to cut. If you're kind of waffling and you're unsure, then use something that will come out, like a wash away marker or something like that, because you want, you know, if you think you're going to change your mind, or you're just sort of finding your line there, then just keep that in mind. Okay, so I'm going to be using, usually I just eyeball things when I pattern. I don't even use my hip curve almost ever. Oops. But I've got my little ruler here, so I'm going to be showing you how I would do this if I was using something like a ruler. So I'm just going to be kind of tracing this line so that it matches up with that line. And I don't know if you guys can see that. Maybe I will make this darker because I'm not sure that you guys can actually see. I'm going to be using just a washable kids marker here. I use this all the time instead of the sewing markers, because I just happen to have these in a million different colors, and they're darker and easier for me to see on the camera at least. But so okay, now I'm going to connect this line here, and this line, try to make it like a gentle curve from this point to that point. So I'll draw that in with my marker so you guys can see a little better. Okay, so that's going to be our cutting line. Remember, that's a half an inch to the side, towards the side seam compared to where those pins were that we placed. All right, so, and you can trace that on both sides, or you can cut one side, fold your t-shirt in half, and then cut the other side, which is what I like to do. Oh yeah, and I forgot I was going to shorten the bottom of the shirt a little bit for her. So I'm going to be, if you're going to shorten something, remember you need to leave enough excess at the bottom for whatever kind of hem you're going to do. Usually on a t-shirt it's like 3/4 of an inch or an inch wide, but you know, you can you can make that however you like. I am going to cut that off here. I'm just cutting 3 inches off because I think that'll probably be about right. And I'm going to cut my piece apart here. Okay, and remember you're cutting through both layers, and if your t-shirt doesn't like to stick together, like mine is very sticky and it just wants to kind of stay, if it's kind of slippery or shifting, then you may want to cut this separately. You could cut your whole shirt along the side seams and be really careful about it. You could also put a bunch of pins in to keep it from shifting around. If you're doing this with an old t-shirt, most old t-shirts are pretty sticky though, like they're not going to slide around on you when you cut. That's one thing that's really nice about this project, is working with this kind of fabric is usually really pretty straightforward, and it's not usually too frustrating. Okay, so, and I like to save my t-shirt scraps for making t-shirt yarn because I'm a crocheter and I like to use up things. So that's what I'm going to be doing, but at this point you won't need that extra piece anymore. Okay, so then if you fold your t-shirt, match up your pins, remember, because that's where you're going to be having those seams. And then you can cut out the other side of your shirt. Oh, actually, I should say, the part that we cut off, we are going to be using this to make a pattern. We're not going to be using it, you know, we're not going to be incorporating it into our shirt, but we do need to save this for a little bit to make our pattern for those side panels. All right, there we are. And then we can open this back up. And I'm going to place a piece of paper underneath the side of my shirt here. There we are. And this is what we're going to be tracing our, that little part that we cut off. We're going to be using that to create our pattern piece along with this curve and this edge of the t-shirt. Okay, so I'm going to put this back on here. Let me open this up a little bit. I'll just get rid of this. Okay, so here is what our shirt looked like before, right? We had that on there. I'm just going to cut off this bottom because we know our side panel is not going to be any longer than that. Okay, so here is what our t-shirt looked like before. We had that on there. Now I know that I'm going to be taking in a little bit at the shoulder here, so I'm going to change around my tracing line. But I want to point out a couple things first because I think it's going to be more common for people to need to add to their pattern piece as opposed to making the alteration that I'm going to be making on this shirt. If this was too tight across your hips, you would want to pivot this out because what that's going to do is it's going to give you that extra fabric down here at the bottom. Let me pull this up just a little bit more so you guys can see. Okay, so we're going to have kind of that wedge shape at the bottom here. If it was too tight at through the bust and the hips, you're going to want to bring this out and move this out a little bit and keep that shoulder together. That's going to give you a little bit of excess up here. So the amount you're going to pivot it out, that's going to depend on how much bigger you want it to be. So what we're looking at here, even though we have cut this, let me see. Don't think about the seam allowances right now. Just think about if this was your shirt and you were wearing it and we extended your shirt this much, would this fit? You know, so you can go ahead and pivot this out. You can add more to the bust, less to the hips. You can kind of, you know, just sort of pat it in place like this. You can reshape things in order to fit your body at this point. So we are going to be tracing a line that is going to be on our sewing line, which is right here. Remember, we keep talking about this 1/2 of an inch thing. We're going to be tracing a line right here onto our paper. Okay, we're not tracing the very edge of this cut piece. We're tracing it 1/2 of an inch in. If you have a Ponce tool or some kind of marker that goes, makes pinpricks in your paper, this would be a great time to use that because you can just run it 1/2 of an inch along there to trace out your line. I'm going to show you how to do it with a pencil because not everybody has one of those. So I'm just going to fold this back about 1/2 an inch, and this doesn't have to be absolutely perfect here. And we're going to just trace this line here. Because what we want is we want this line that we're drawing here, this is going to represent the seam line where we are going to be sewing that side piece onto this front panel here. Okay, and then I'm going to make sure that I draw a little notch here across the bottom. And I'm going to draw one across, move this in here, one over here as well to show us where we're going to end. Okay, so now, if we were going to be adding some excess to our waistline, remember when you add it here, if you add this here, if there's, say at your hip there's an inch here, that's going to be 4 inches in total around your whole shirt because you've got an inch here, an inch on the back side of this piece, plus it's going to be mirrored on the other side. Okay, so just keep that in mind when you're altering these pattern pieces, that if you said, oh, if I just add, you know, 2 inches in circumference to my hips, it'll be perfect. So what that would mean would be if it's 2 inches in circumference, you have to take that total, you know, total excess that you're going to be adding and divide it by 4, because there's 1 front and back. So 1, 2, and then front and back on this side as well. So that would be like you'd be adding a 1/2 inch here, okay, instead of, you know, just to make sure. If you add a 1/2 inch here, you get an extra, it's going to be 2 inches larger when you cut out your shirt. Okay, but in this case, I was going to keep this the same here, and I'm going to take it in up here. So I know I want to take it into about here. I'm going to go ahead and just hold this pin down, move this over. That's where I want my new line to be. And I'm keeping my shoulder at the same point as it was before. Actually, maybe moving it out just a teensy bit. So that it's an inch, let's see, I want it to be about 1 inch wide from that seam line. And that's just personal preference. You could have it wider if you wanted to, doesn't matter. And then normally you can just sort of trace the seam between your shirt and your sleeve. So we'll go ahead and do that. But it's going to come to here, so I'm going to kind of blend it in up to that point. And then at this point, right here, I'm going to have that blend in to about maybe somewhere about down here. So I'm going to trace this part, which was all fine as it was. And so I'm going to blend. This is the point where I moved the arm, the side seam in just 1 inch there, and now I'm going to blend this down. Okay, so now this piece has been drawn out without any seam allowances on it. There's no seam allowances that have been added. These are just where we want the seams to be. So we would have to go ahead and add seam allowance and kind of true things up, make them look a little nicer. If you have a hip curve or some other kind of curve, you can use that here. Kind of straighten things out. So then at this point, you would want to go ahead and just add on your seam allowance. So we're adding on 1/2 inch, so I'm going to draw a 1/2 inch all the way along this line here, this seam line. Let me make sure that you guys can actually see these. So this is going to be a little sloppy, but I'm just going to trace over it so you can see it. So this was my original line that I drew when I traced my shirt. We can true that up just a little bit there. It looks kind of messy. I just wanted to make sure you guys can actually see what I'm doing, because I know my pencil lines are not very dark. And here we go. And since I moved that arm's eye in, I'm going to kind of round out the shape of the arm's eye a little bit here to give her a little bit more room, like that. You would only really need to do that if you took some fabric out of the side. There we are. So we've got this piece here, and then we're going to go ahead and add 1/2 inch seam allowance along this side, because we know that's going to be a seam. We also need to add 1/2 inch seam allowance along the side seam, unless this is a perfectly straight line, which we could mirror. So you could actually have a panel cut out that is a side front and a side back that are stuck together at this point. Normally there's going to be a little bit of shaping here, and actually there should probably be just a little bit of shaping right there for the waist, so it dips in a little bit. Like that. We do not need any seam allowance along the armhole at all, because we're going to be binding that off. We already added the seam allowance to the bottom hem here because this was just drawn out to the same length as this shirt, but that is only because I am re-hemming this shirt. If you liked the hemline of your shirt and you left it alone on that center focal point tee, then you would need to, if you traced straight across from, like, let's just say this had a hem in it. And when you were tracing this bit over here, you drew the line over here. That did not include a seam allowance. So you would need to add, you know, your 3/4 or 1 inch seam allowance down here, whatever it is that your t-shirt was hemmed with, so it kind of matches from the side to the front. Okay, so, and then you also are going to need to add 1/2 inch seam allowance up here at the shoulder. All right. So this would have that 1/2 inch seam allowance on it, going all the way down this side. All right, let me just check in and see if anybody has any questions. We got some hellos. Oh, and Patricia says hi from Kentucky, and their granddaughter would love this project. Awesome. Oh, someone's sewing machine has a triple stretch stitch and a stretch zigzag stitch. Excellent, yes. Those would be really good. And good morning to Shatika. Hello, I'm glad you're here. And the side panels have to be a t-shirt fabric. Esther's wondering if the side panels have to be a t-shirt fabric. They don't have to be. I designed it that way, but really it could be whatever you want it to be. The side panels could be a totally different fabric. Just keep in mind it's not, you know, if you pick a woven fabric, it's where you sew, okay. So when you sew a knit fabric together with the woven fabric, depending on the way the fabric hangs, if it's stretchy, if it's flowy, there might be weirdness things happening there. So just make sure if you're hanging onto them both, that they both drape about the same, kind of feel a similar way, but you don't have to use t-shirt fabric on the side. You could use something else if that's what you have. Or if that's what you want the look of, that's fine too. Just know that it's maybe not going to be stretchy if you're picking a woven, and just think about how it's going to look when you're sewing a knit together with something that might not be a knit. A lot of knits, though, a lot of t-shirts don't really have that much. They have some stretch sideways, but they don't have that much sort of drape or hang. It just depends on the type of t-shirt material that you're working with. So. But yeah, I don't want, you know, this is a good time to experiment, you guys. Susie Q is saying, good morning, Susie. Seth says, primo shirt, awesome, thank you. Good morning from California, from Leah. And let's see, Quilting in the Mountain says, I'm sewing pieces of a silky scarf onto an old jean jacket as we speak. Awesome, that sounds really cool. Jody says hello from Seattle, Washington. Hi, Jody. I was just in Seattle a couple weeks ago. Lovely city. Already thinking of ways to use this for just color blocking my t-shirts. Yeah, absolutely. You can, you know, just take this idea even and just think about the possibilities. There's so many other ways to upcycle things. In fact, I was going to bring in a bunch of different ways that I like to upcycle things, but then I was like, no, this is going to take too long. I already am biting off a lot here with trying to get this done in an hour, which we'll see how that goes. Okay, so now hopefully you guys are understanding what this whole thing is about here. Just remember, the main thing is when you trace it off, think about, don't forget to kind of move that away if you need to add fabric in, or, you know, if you're taking some out, you got to make your alterations there. And then don't forget to add the seam allowance, okay? You have to have it on the side seam. You have to have it on the center front, center back line. You don't need any around the armhole. And then you may have to add some to the bottom. Probably you will have to add some to the bottom unless you cut off your t-shirt like I did. Because then if you cut it off, already allowing for that hem on that center focal point tee, then you are going to have it at the right length already on this tee if you use that to make your pattern, okay? And I should also mention these panels are the same for the front and the back of your shirt. Now I know that like when you're making shirts, they're generally not the same, but t-shirts are very often extremely similar like through this area on the fronts and the backs. And just for simplicity's sake, just to keep it simpler, we're just keeping them the same from the front to the back, and I find that it fits really well. Now, if you are somebody who knows a lot about patterning and about fit, and you've worked on things already before for your body, you know, go ahead and you can make a side front and a side back panel, and you can alter them to fit. One thing that you might think about doing, and you could even do this for the front and the back if you don't alter it too much, is if you, especially if you are a larger person, someone who has a larger bust, you may want to think about taking out a little bit of excess fabric right here. So right on the side, you may want to pinch a little bit out there on your t-shirt, because your t-shirt's not going to be cut out to be making that curve and that shape. And if you have a larger bust, you may end up with a little bit of what we like to call gaposis here along that line. So let me just show you really quickly how you can do that. This is just something to think about as you're working on your piece. And if you are fortunate enough to have, you know, multiple shirts, or you can use a mock-up fabric to kind of test this out. Sorry, my paper scissors are very sticky, and I have 2 children, and now I know what they were using last night with their craft project. Okay, so if you want to take out a little bit of excess in that arm's eye, I'm going to cut this away so that you guys can actually see this a little better. You can, you know, especially if you have a larger pattern piece here, you can take a little dart right here and pivot a little bit of this excess out, just a little bit. I wouldn't go more than 1/4 of an inch unless you're going to actually try this on yourself and check. But this is a way to, and you can make multiple lines here to curve this a little more. And what that does is it brings the circumference of your armhole closer to your body here, instead of kind of flaring out and being kind of as loose fitting as normal, you know, just like a regular, not super close fitting shaped t-shirt. Now this is, because we're tracing this off of a shirt that you have, I don't know what your shirt is going to be cut like. I don't know how, you know, how they cut those armholes, if it's got a nice fitted sleeve or if it's very boxy. This is just, I'm just showing you this in case you're finding that there's a gap here and it's kind of loose at the armhole. So you'd basically, what you're doing is you're just pinching this. So if you're wearing it and you find that by pinching this is solving your problem, then you can go ahead and pivot that out, tape your pattern piece together, and cut out a new panel. Okay? All right, so we've got that part patterned. I'm not going to use this pattern piece because I already traced a better one earlier before this. Let's see. It should be about the same size though. So here is my pattern piece that I've got my seam allowance on and all that. And the next thing we're going to pattern is the flutter sleeve. So this is very simple. All you're going to be doing is taking your measurement from your shoulder point to your bust point. So on my sister, that was 10 inches from the shoulder to the bust point. So just let me show you in case you're not familiar with these terms. So it should be like where you put that pin, only not moved out 2 inches. But you're going to go from your shoulder to your bust point. On this form, it's like 7 3/4 maybe of an inch. So that measurement there, that's where we're going to start out. So for my sister, it was 10 inches. So I'm going to do, this is, and hang out just for a second. There's going to be a tiny bit of math here, but it's very easy. Okay, so shoulder to bust point. And this is all in your download, so you don't have to write this down. For her, it was 10 inches. So we're going to take that 10 inches, we're going to divide it into 4. So we have 10 divided by 4, and that is 2.5 inches. Then we take the 2.5 inches and we multiply that by 3. So that is 7.5 inches. So that's an important number there. So basically what we're doing is we're taking that measurement from shoulder to bust point, and what we want to find is the 3/4 of that distance. That's what all that math was doing. We're just finding a 3/4. If you don't want to do the math, actually, you can just eyeball this. You can go from your shoulder to your bust point and be like, okay, what's 3/4 of that distance? Oh, it's about there, and measure that. That's an easy way to do it too. But I just wanted to make it a little bit more math oriented, just to be a little more precise for those of you who like that. Okay, so we've got our 7.5 inches. We're going to take 7.5 and we're going to multiply that by 4, because we're going to have 1, 2, and then we want to double that length so that it can be ruffled. Okay, so for me, 7.5 times 4 is 30. So I cut out a strip of paper that's 30 inches long. So that's the 7.5 times 4. Whatever that is, you're going to cut out a strip of that. That is, you know, that quotient, the product. 7.5 times 4 is 30. So for me, it's 30 inches long. For you, it might be a different number. Okay, this, again, if you're like, oh, you're losing me, it's all in the download, so that'll refresh your memory a little bit when you get that. Okay, so I cut this out. And then this needs to be about 3.5 inches wide. And what that distance is it's including the seam allowance, and it's from this part on your sleeve to this part right here where we cut it off. So if you are thinking, okay, I want my flutter sleeves to be very short, then you can go ahead and make a shorter rectangle. You know, maybe you want it 2 inches or something like that. Whatever you want the longest distance to be, cut out your rectangle like that. Then we're going to fold our piece in half like this. And we're going to fold it in half again. So now we have, this is divided up into fourths. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 sections. We're going to fold it in half. And let me lay this like how I laid it in the pattern so that it's not confusing. Okay, so I put the fold on this side. And here's my crease line. You guys probably can't see that, so I'm going to make it a little darker. There's my crease line. And we're going to be just making a nice curved arch, kind of arc shape from this corner here up to about there. It can go a little bit further past that, but you're just going to make a kind of a rounded shape. And if you're like, I'm not going to be able to make it rounded and look like that, you can just draw a straight line, and then after you draw that straight line, give it a little bit of a curve, okay? You can use a hip curve. You could also use, you know, something that has a large circumference to kind of trace part of it onto there. It does not need to be perfect, because guess what? You're going to ruffle it all up anyway. It's going to be fine. Okay, and then you're going to just trim that off. Just like that. Oh, and I should mention that on your pattern pieces, you should mark where that 7.5 inches, let me back up. Okay, so we're finding, there were 2 distances I talked about. One distance was shoulder to bust point, and I call that X in my pattern. So you already had that marked on your center focal point tee with that pin, right? Like that's that distance from your shoulder down. Then we found 3/4 of that distance, and we used that to calculate this. That 3/4 of that distance is what you want to mark on your pattern piece. So for example, on my pattern piece, it was 10 inches to the bust point, and it was 7.5 inches to that 3/4 of that 10 inches measurement there. So I marked that on my pattern piece here. And then I can go ahead and make a notch. I have a pattern notcher, but you can just cut it out if you want to, just to remind you to put that notch in when you trace out your pattern pieces. And you should also have a notch, or like a little tiny notch, clipped onto your shirt so that you can line that up later. So I'm just lining up. This is where my seam allowance is sticking out here. That's why they're not even. So that's where my seam line is going to be, a 1/2 inch away. So this is all lining up just fine. And this would be where that little notch is. This notch is not only going to help you put your pieces together, but this is going to tell you where your ruffled sleeve ends at that point right there. That's what we were finding, okay? I should have mentioned that before. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so now we've got this pattern piece with the notch marked, and we've got seam allowances where we need them. And we have this piece, and this includes a 1/2 inch seam allowance right here. The flat side of your pattern piece, that is the side that's going to get stitched into that seam. Okay, the curved side ends up here on that cut edge. And also, I did make a note of this. If you cut this ruffled sleeve out of a t-shirt fabric that, we'll look for t-shirt fabric that isn't going to curl, because we are just using the cut edge. We are not finishing the edge unless you want to. You can finish it if you want to serge it or hem it or whatever you like. I find that hemming the t-shirt makes it too bulky and it doesn't want to be a nice little flutter shape. So I didn't do that. So just keep that in mind. You're going to want to find a t-shirt fabric that's not going to curl. So once you cut into that, you can pull on it. Here, actually, let me show you what that looks like. If you cut into your fabric, well, this is, let's see, oh, here's a piece. Okay, so for example, this is a fabric that does curl, and I know this, and I'm still using it because we'll get to that in a little bit, but it's just too perfect for my project. But see, when I pull on it, it wants to curl a little bit. You can see it curling up on that edge. Try to find one that's not going to curl like that. Most t-shirt fabrics aren't, even if they're not a rib knit or a double knit. Those are the ones that don't curl as much. You may think, how am I supposed to know what this is? This is like a used t-shirt, Brenda. Then you just cut it and see if it rolls. If it rolls a lot, then you might have a problem, or you might need to find some way to finish that, which I did, which I'll get to in a little bit. Okay, so now that you have your pattern pieces, you're gonna go ahead and cut everything out. So I'm gonna switch to my next sample here and show you how I've cut things. I do want to point out one thing though. When you're cutting out your pieces, here we go. Just some things to think about. When you're cutting out your side panel pieces, you may want to sew pieces of fabric together, and in order to get, like if your piece is too big or it's running off the edge, like say for example, you're like, oh, this would be really cool if I had these little Lego people running up my side panel like that. And then you lay this on there and it doesn't fit, right? So what do? You can, there's multiple things you can do. You can certainly just chop off this piece of fabric, open up your sleeve and lay that down on top and stitch it together. Or you can also, if this piece was down here and it was only running off just a little bit, keep in mind that you can have your pattern piece kind of go to the back here. So you can chop this off so you can let it all lay out smooth, but it's okay to be going across these seam lines. You might find that you want to cut out your ruffle sleeve top or your ruffle sleeves. Maybe you're cutting out your ruffle sleeves from this and you're like, oh, I think that'd be really cool to have those words in there. So you can lay it out and you're like, oh, but this piece is too long. It's going to be running into all that. So that's okay. If that happens to you, then you can just cut it a little longer and sew those pieces together, and then, no problem. You can certainly think about this as just being able to piece things together. And most of my shirts have some weird piecing like that in there, and it looks totally fine. Like this one, there's a seam. There's actually a seam right there. This was the front of the shirt, and this went into the armpit of the shirt right here, into the sleeve a little bit. There's a little chunk of the sleeve from the previous shirt here. And this was, across the chest of the shirt. So it's fine. And I haven't had any problems with that stuff, ripping out or falling apart after I've just cut through those t-shirt seams. I've never had that happen. If it does happen, you know how to sew, so you can just sew it back together. It's not really a big deal. But what I want to say too is, instead of doing a little seam when you're putting those pieces together, it works really well if you can overlap one piece of fabric onto another and then just trim away the excess. So what I mean by that is, let's see here. I will do that here. Whoops, here's my excess. So let's say we wanted to put some pieces together and cut out a new pattern piece. Instead of having a bulky seam, you could just lay those pieces one on top of the other and then do a zigzag that goes, from this section over here back and forth like that, and then you can trim away the excess on the other side. And then it really blends in really well. It's not going to it's going to call less attention to itself, although you will see that zigzag line. So it's kind of like 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I like it better when because it likes to lay flat. So I do that on a lot of my pieces. All right, let's start getting this together since we're running short on time here. The construction of the shirt, you're going to start with making those little ruffle sleeves. Let me see. I'll go through. You can put this together in many different orders. You don't have to follow along with the exact order that I did things, but I am going to try and do that. Okay. Yep. Okay. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to make those little ruffle sleeves. And in order to do that, we're going to do 2 rows of basting. So they're nice long stitches, as long as your machine will go. So I'm going to put this up to a 4 on my machine. Width is at 0. I'm on a straight stitch. And I'm going to go ahead and do a stitching line that's 1/4 of an inch away from the cut edge on that flat side. All right, and then cut your tails, leaving a long tail so that you can hang on to that later, because we're going to use those for gathering the edge of our flutter sleeve. All right, now I'm going to do another stitching line 1/4 of an inch away, and you might be thinking, I can gather it with 1 thread, Brenda, that's fine. I'm just going to do 1. Well, it helps a lot later on when you're sewing this to your top if you can have a nice flat space there, and the only way you're going to get that to be nice and flat is if you have 2 gathering lines. So even though I like to skip over steps myself, I would not skip over this step because it's just going to make it quicker in the long run if you actually do this part. All right, and no back tacking or locking your stitches there because we need them to be able to slide. Okay, so we're going to take 2 threads from each side and make sure that they are the threads that are facing the, whatever side you're looking at. So I've got 1 here and 1 here. And we're going to go ahead and hang on to those 2 threads while we push this fabric to the side, okay? So this is just like opening curtains, right, on a curtain rod. And we're going to continue doing this until it is the distance that's 7.5 inches. On my shirt, sorry. On your shirt, it'll be whatever that, whatever Y is. Whatever that, it was the bust point, 3/4 of the shoulder to bust point length, which I labeled as Y in your download. That's why I keep saying Y. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing on the other side. You could also just continue gathering all the way across. That's fine too. I like to do 1 side at a time. Just, I don't know, it just makes it a little bit easier. And because this fabric, because I know this fabric is going to curl a little bit, I actually did a zigzag over the edge, which instead of serging, it makes it look like almost little tiny picots, little tiny dots. I don't know if you guys can see this, but I really like how this edge looks, and it keeps it from stretching too much, because when it stretches, that's when it rolls up. If it's just hanging out there, it doesn't tend to roll as much. So I put that zigzag there because I didn't really want it to stretch, even though zigzags do stretch. When you're doing it over the edge, it kind of makes a little bit of a, I don't know, it's almost like it's doing a rolled hem, but not quite, because it's zigzagging over it and making all these little bumps. But that seems to stop it from rolling up too much. So I just wanted to show you guys this. Even though I caution against using a fabric that rolls up, sometimes you just find like the perfect thing for your project and you have to do it anyway, which is kind of what this project is about. All right, so you're gonna get those gathered up. And I should clarify, you do not need to put the zigzag on here unless you are having a problem with the fabric rolling. That was just, I just wanted to show you how I did that. All right, so then we are going to put your ruffled sleeve into your top. So you should have a little notch there. That's gonna tell you where the end of your ruffle sleeve is gonna go. And you're gonna put right sides together. So the side of the ruffle sleeve that you want to see when it's flipped open, that should be touching your shirt. You're gonna lay it down this way, and you're gonna pin those two together. Let's see, where's that notch? Here it is. So here is my notch. That's going to tell me where the sleeve stops. And I've got all these annoying long threads, which I could tie in a knot and cut off, but we'll just wait until we stitch it. Then we'll cut them all. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and pin this in. And there's the center of my sleeve. I know this because there's a seam in it. But you can also fold it in half, or you could cut a little notch in your sleeve before you gather it all up so that you know where the center of it is. And you can place that on the center of your, you know, the shoulder seam. And we'll just place this in here. And I'm pinning right on that 1/2 inch line. So that was 1/4 inch seam, or gathering thread at 1/4, and then 1 1/2. We're pinning right at that 1/2 line because we're going to have a 1/2 inch seam allowance here. All right. There's the other side. So this is the back that I'm pinning here now. Okay, and we're going to just go ahead and stitch along that line. And for almost all of the seams in this top, I am going to be doing a narrow, short zig. So I've got it set at 2 length and 2 width. But if you have a stretch stitch, you can use that. For this little section here where the sleeve is going, it ends up being kind of a thicker spot, and it really doesn't stretch all that much, so you don't need to worry about it too much. You could even get away with a straight seam here if you wanted to. You could do a straight stretch stitch. There's lots of options. And I should mention, I'm just using a regular needle here. I think this one is a size 11. Actually, normally I sew with, you know, things like this with a slightly larger needle, but this particular knit is very tightly knit or something. This stripy one that's really curly. And I probably should have like maybe a Microtex needle or something a little sharper, because you can hear it kind of not wanting to go through it very well. But it's going to be fine. I'll just go slow. Now I'm just going to cut off all those threads, and you can kind of cut off the tip of that ruche sleeve if it's in the way. It's not a big deal. You can always trim it later. Or I should say the ruffle sleeve. So here's our, once you get the two little ruffle sleeves put onto your top, then you're going to be ready to start working on the side panels. And my side panels, I was lucky enough to find this awesome Jetsons t-shirt, which I thought would be perfect with David Bowie. Anyway, this is what we're going to be making this side panel here. We've got our two side panels cut out. You will recognize these pattern pieces. This is what we drafted, okay, our two pieces. So you're going to go ahead and do those side seams. So the shorter of the two, make sure you put your right sides together. And you're going to do that same narrow zig or a stretch stitch or something like that along that side seam so that you have 1/2 inch seam allowance there. And you know, you could definitely use some pins here. I'm not really much of a pinner, so if my pieces stick together okay, I usually just don't use pins. But if you're newer to sewing, definitely use some quilter's pins or whatever to hold those pieces together as you get to them, or clips, whatever you prefer. So we're going to open that up. And now we're going to go ahead and just bind off that arm side. Oh, I forgot to mention there's binding. So you're just going to cut the binding. It should be 1.25 inches wide. And it just needs to be long enough to bind off 2 armholes and a neck hole. And you could use different colors for these. You could use all the same color. Doesn't matter which color you cut it out of. Just kind of look at all your pieces and what you think would look nice there. So I just cut a very long strip from, you know, kind of in a spiral out of the bottom of this t-shirt because I cut off the bottom of it, and that's what I'm going to be using here. So I'm going to place this along the armhole edge of my top. Here, I'll show you what this looks like. Let me move this out of here so you can see what I'm doing. But here is the side panel. So we have the front side front, side back right here. And we're going to be binding off the armhole before we put it together into a circle. And there's, like anything in sewing, there's lots of different ways to do this. If you like to cut your binding to the correct size first and put it into a circle and then stitch it on, you can do that. This works really well for t-shirt fabrics that might be thinner or not as stretchy or don't spring back, or, you know, it basically covers, you could use multiple different kinds of fabrics for this. So that's why I chose to do it this way. But I'm just laying it on there and stitching 1/2 inch, or sorry, it should be 3/8 of an inch away from the edge, not 1/2 inch, which I kind of made that mistake. So I'll just scooch over here. Should be 3/8 of an inch away from the edge here. On all the bindings, that's how I pattern them out, so that they would be 3/8 inch wide. And when you get around to this kind of U shape, you definitely want to pull a bit on your binding fabric, so that way it's not going to look too loose. You're going to stretch it just a little bit as you're laying it down. You're not stretching the fabric behind it, you're just stretching the binding as you're putting it on. All right, now we're going kind of at a straighter spot, so you don't need to stretch anymore. I mean, you could stretch it just a tiny little bit if you feel like you need to, but. All right, and I'm just going to cut off the excess of my binding. And I did make that mistake at the beginning. I started 1/2 inch away from the edge instead of 3/8. So let me see, I think I'll just still make it work. Okay. This is not really what I should be doing right here, but I'm just going to trim a tiny little bit off just because I don't have time to rip that out, and I want to show you the next step. So this will be a little bit uneven, but that's okay. So the next step is to take your binding and you're going to fold it, you're going to open it up, and then you're going to fold it around to the wrong side of your fabric here. And then we're going to do a little zigzag. The zigzag is going to end up right next to the original stitching line on the purple. So we're going to be looking at it from this side, and the zigzag is going to end up right here. So if you have a straight stretch stitch, that would look lovely in this, and you may want to think about cutting your binding just a hair longer so that you can stitch in the ditch here. There's lots of different ways to put a binding on, so if there's another method that you prefer, with the materials that you have, absolutely you can, certainly swap out for a different method here. But this works great if you don't have any fancy stretch stitches and, you're dealing with, maybe less desirable fabrics to be binding this with because you're using scraps of t-shirts. Like we have a couple more hellos. Let me make sure I didn't miss any questions here. Let's see. Mayar is saying, hi, I'm in the UK. Are you using inches or centimeters? I am using inches. And I can't remember if I also used centimeters in the handout, but I think it's all in inches. We have a hello from Chile. Awesome, hello. And a hello from Italy. And Glenda's saying, I never thought about making my t-shirts wider at the bottom. This is great. Yes, this is a great way to modify your shirts and make it look like it was cut out that way on purpose, not like you had to piece a little chunk in. Okay, and Jacqueline's wondering if there's a replay. Yes, you can always watch these videos later. And Lisa's saying, what needle do I recommend? Normally I find that using just a universal, like 12, or a size, let's see, 90, 12, or 80. Let's see, I might be mixing up my European sizes. 80, 11, or a 90, or a 12. Those seem to work really well with these kind of fabrics. You might even go up to a 14, just depending. If you have a tricky fabric, you might like something where it's skipping stitches or things like that are happening with your knit. You could try using a ballpoint needle. You could try using a Microtex sharp needle. You could try using a jersey needle. It just kind of depends on what fabrics you're using. But normally, I do these a lot, and I almost always just use a universal needle, and it works pretty much all the time. I don't think I've ever had to switch it out. Sometimes I slow down a little bit for like adding tricky little fabrics in, like the stripy one that I was doing earlier. But yeah, usually it's just universal. Okay, so I've got this all bound off here. That's what it should look like. Now we're going to make the seam in the shoulder. So we're going to place right sides together, and we're going to do a straight stitch across. This does not need to stretch at all, and I like to do a straight stitch because, well, I'll show you. I'll show you on the next step. So I'm switching this to a straight stitch here, putting my width at 0, and I'm going to be making a seam line that is 1/2 inch away from my cut edge. And go a little slower here because you are sewing through a lot of layers when you go through that binding. All right, and then once you get that stitched, gonna open it up and I am going to do one little stitch to hold this flat. Now this is not maybe the most professional way to make these sleeves with the binding and all that. You really could make the binding first and set it all into your arm's eye. But I find for beginners that this is just an easier process. And this looks good, and this is going to be underneath the flutter sleeve anyway. So we have these ugly, bulky seam allowances sticking out here. That's kind of the problem with binding it off in this way. And I just like to open them up. That's why we did a straight stitch earlier. And I'm going to do a straight stitch right across here to just hold them flat. And I find that that looks just fine. I like how it looks. It's not really a problem. And it's just a little, I don't know, it's quick and easy to do. And it's easy for beginners because you don't have the frustration of having to get that edging or the binding strip exactly perfect. All right, so you're going to do one of these for the right side of your shirt and one for the left side. And when you get those two done, then we're going to set it into the top. So we've already got our little ruffle sleeves here, and we've got these sides made. So remember, you're going to put right sides together at this point. So I'm going to turn this actually inside out. Oh, and I should mention too, on this top, I'm not going to do this because the neck hole is actually large enough, but sometimes I find on these t-shirts, it looks a little cuter if you cut off the neckline and then you rebind it just below. That's what I did on almost all the other shirts that I have. And just because we're running really short on time, I'm running over my time limit. I'm not going to show you that part, but that's just exactly the same way as how I bound off the armhole, except that you're going to stop and start on, let me just show you one little part of that. Actually, I don't know if I can't really talk you through that whole part. Let's see. Okay, so maybe I will rebind this. I'm changing my ideas here because I just want to make sure you guys understand how this goes, especially if you're newer to sewing. I don't want to leave you hanging here. So I'm going to cut this off. The only reason I'm doing this is because I like it when the neck hole is just a little bit bigger for this type of top. It just, to me, it looks a little cuter. And then you also have the option of tying in with color or whatever, of tying in other fabrics that you're using in this top. Like for example, here, I would use a black binding, which I think I have a little bit of a black binding. Here we go. Wait. Oh, here it is. Okay. So I'm not going to sew this whole thing, but I just want to get you guys started. When you are binding the neck hole, it's just the same process as the shoulders, except when you start, so here's the front of my top. I'm going to start right here. This is the right side of my shirt when I'm wearing it. I'm going to place my binding just before the seam with the edge folded. Now this is black. Hopefully you can see this with my thumb under. I have like, 3/8 of an inch or so folded over on this end. And I'm going to lay that right here and start stitching it on. So you're going to seam it. Let's see, maybe I'll just pin it. You're going to seam it just how we did that first seam line when we were putting the binding on the armholes. So you're going to seam it all the way around, and when you get around to the end, let's just imagine we have stitched this on and we're coming around and we've got this going on in our machine. We're zigzagging, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Then when we get to this point here, we just overlap that. We just continue past that folded line, okay? Just continue stitching to that point. Then, after you've stitched that, this will be a nice folded edge. You would fold it around to the inside like that, and then you would do your second row of your stretch stitch or your zigzag or whatever, just like we did on the armhole, okay? Just want to make sure you guys know how to stop and start that. That'll be a little project for me to finish later. Okay, so I'm turning my top inside out, and I'm going to tuck those sleeves in like this. Okay, so here we have, there's the right side, or the front of my shirt, and it's on the inside right now. So here's the front of my shirt. Let's see. we want it to go like this. Make sure when you're doing this that you are actually sewing front to a front, okay? And not front to a side back. So get that all placed right, and I'm gonna find my little seam here, place that on my shoulder seam, pin this in, and then you can find the notch in your fabric. Where is it? There it is. Wait. Oh, there it is. So there's the notch that's telling me where my ruffle sleeve ends. So I'm gonna put that right up to where the notch in my center focal point tee is, so they match up. And this seems a little off. Let me see here. There we go. I will move that just a little bit there. And because I cut this so that it would have the same amount of a hem here, I know I can't line that cut edge up with the hem line. It has to hang out further down, okay? So, you know, your front piece may be hemmed or it may not be hemmed. This is what it would look like if it were already hemmed and you didn't mess around with the length of that center front tee. I wanted to show you what this looks like. And this is that center, or that side front piece that we cut out, and we have that extra allowance for the hem to turn up, okay? So it's not gonna match up right here, okay? And we're gonna go ahead and just pin this all together all the way up the side front and down the side back. Okay, and also remember on this side, we're gonna leave this a little bit longer because that's gonna be our hem. Sometimes it's hard to pin this stuff because the t-shirt wants to curl so much. That's the problem I'm having here. But once you get it seamed up, it doesn't matter if it wants to curl. Okay. All right, so again, we're going to be using that, you know, fairly narrow zigzag, too wide, too length, and we're just going to be stitching a 1/2 inch away from the seam, the cut edge for that 1/2 inch seam allowance there. So I'm just going to be starting here where that the purple t-shirt is. And the remaining part, the hemline, is just going to kind of hang out there for a little bit. So when you get to the point where you're stitching through that ruffled tee, the sleeve part, just make sure that it isn't getting bunched up underneath those needles. So take the time to kind of straighten this out. I mean, the cool thing is you've got this little window here, but just make sure that you go slow, and you can periodically just check and make sure that you are not accidentally catching part of that little flutter sleeve in your seam. I mean, a section you don't want to catch. And make sure that the seam allowances from the shoulder right there are spread open. Go a little bit slower when you're stitching through all the thicknesses there. I had some extra thicknesses because the piece that I cut out actually incorporated part of a binding from a neck hole from the previous shirt. So there's a little extra bulk in mine right there, but it's just how I had to cut that piece out in order to cut out my full pattern piece. All right, now we're sewing right back down the other side. And we're getting close to the end of our live event here. So if you guys have any comments or any questions, if you have suggestions of things you'd like to see more of in the future, like types of projects, if you guys are excited about these kinds of, deconstructed, reconstructed projects. I do this kind of thing a lot, so let me know if you're interested in more of this type of thing. Also tomorrow I want to mention that I'm going to be back for another live event that is all about patching and embroidery. So keeping, your clothing patched up and fixed up, covering up stains and that type of thing, but making it look super cute while you're doing it. So if you guys want to join me for that, that's tomorrow. And that is another event that Sulky has partnered with us as well. So I'm going to be using some really nice hand stitching thread tomorrow, which has just been a joy to work with. Alrighty. Whew, we made it all the way around. So you would do this on both sides of your piece. And let's see, let me open this up so you guys can see what it looks like. Like, there we go. It's looking very fun. All right, so then you would do that to set in the other piece here. So this would go in on the other side. And then the last part that you would do, of course, you would have already bound your neck hole at some point. Or actually, you can bind off your neck hole at any point. If you're like, I don't know if I want to cut that out, I kind of want to see what this looks like, you can leave that ribbing in there and try it on. And then if you decide you want to cut that out and rebind your neck hole, like how I was talking about earlier, you can do that at the very end. It's not hard to do. But the last thing is you have to just hem the bottom side panels here. So, or you might have to hem the whole shirt. That's maybe a little more straightforward if you if you were altering the length of your shirt and you cut it off, you already kind of have that hem line sticking down. You just fold the whole thing up and you can zigzag it up with whatever hem you cut it out with, like 1 inch or 3/4 of an inch or whatever. But here, because this was already hemmed and this was not hemmed, you might be wondering, like, how can I hem that and make it look nice? It's very easy. All you need to do is you just take here's your already hemmed piece, right? So we're looking at it from that side and we can see that excess hem hanging out on top. We're going to fold that down like this and make sure it's really folded against this fold line here, against the bottom hem. You want to make sure you're not just folding it a little bit like that. It really needs to be tight up against that hem, and we're gonna do a little stitch line right here on top of the seam that we already did. So you can do a zigzag here. You can also do straight stitch here. It really doesn't matter. It's just a little short seam. Oh, someone's asking about my brand of sewing machine. I'm just using a Singer Heavy Duty. I am the type of person who does not really like to have computerized stuff. I don't know if you guys know this about me, but I'm a very analog type girl. So when I was looking for a new machine, I have lots of machines, but they're not portable machines at home. But this one, I wanted a portable machine so I could bring it here to the studio. And I wanted something that I knew would be like, you know, a mechanical kind of thing where I could fix parts or at least try to figure out what's going on. I didn't want to have a computerized machine. I know there's probably a lot of you out there going, oh, Brenda, you're missing out on so much. And I know. But what I use my machine for most is projects like this or also other heavy duty kind of projects. And I just needed kind of a workhorse sewing machine. So I got this one and I've been really happy with it so far. So. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing to the other side, and I just talked through all of that, and I didn't show you what it looked like. I'm going to show you in just a second, because I'm doing the same exact process to the side back panel here. I just folded that excess hem over, and now when we open it up, you can kind of put your finger in there and open it up, and it's, you know, already kind of put the hem in for you. And now you just have to open up that side seam, fold that up. You could also trim off your side seams too. If you have a serger, that's, you know, a great option as well. You don't need to have these big seam allowances. Normally you wouldn't have a 1/2-inch seam allowance in a t-shirt like this. But the reason that I patterned it that way is just because it makes it a little easier to alter in case you're, you know, putting it back on and you're like, oh, I wish I had just made it a little bit bigger. Well, then you can open up that seam and you can fix it. You can always trim that stuff off. Okay, and then to finish off my hem, I am going to do a very wide zig because I like how the width looks compared to if you have those 2 rows of stitching, like a twin needle or a cover stitch machine or whatever the machine is that does the professional, you know, 2 lines of the needles, 2 lines of stitching on the outside. I'm going to do a wide zig that's about the same width as those 2. Also, speaking of twin needles or double needles, if you have a double needle or a twin needle, then this is a really great place to use that. Doing this hem will look nice and professional if you want to do that. But having said that though, it's to me, this project is less about having it look like it's the store-bought shirt and more about having it look like you took something that you loved and you made it into something even cooler. All right, and normally, you know, you'd probably stitch that with a matching color, but I just left it because in the spirit of this project, it doesn't really matter to me, but also so you guys could actually see what I did, because I know I'm sewing on black here. That's why I've been using purple throughout. But that's what it looks like, and with a little quick press, it'll look nice and crisp. And then you just do that to the other side as well. And then that's what you end up with. Beautiful tee that fits your body, and you can really get creative with this stuff, you guys. To me, that was the most fun part of this whole project, is figuring out which t-shirts I wanted to combine together. Because to me, it just became this big art project thing. Like, what did I want to say? What kind of theme did I want to have? Looking at it for, you know, color and balance and all that sort of thing. You don't need to make it into a project like that. That's just something that I couldn't help but do. But, you know, you can definitely just think of this as like, oh, I really love this shirt. I wish it still fit me. You know, make it into a new shirt. You can find matching t-shirts to cut up and use for the sides and for the little ruffle sleeve, or you could omit the ruffle sleeve if you want to. I just want, you know, to make sure that you are thinking about this tee as being for you and what you like to do. So I know I've been emphasizing a lot, like, you know, kind of some of these are kind of wild, but I really love this kind of eclectic style. I love piecing things together. I like it to look like something more of like, you know, like layers of graffiti painted on top of each other. That's kind of like how I envision this, this project a little bit. I know that's not everyone's aesthetic though, so, you know, do what you love and, you know, make something that says you know. Make it your own. That's why we're all doing these crafting things, right? All right, let me just double check and see if there's anything else we've got left. Robin says, this was very fun and creative, great ideas. Oh, they say I'm a good teacher. Thank you so much. Have I ever added a ruffle to the hem? Seems like it might be fun. Yeah, I have done that. I have also done, like if you have a shirt that's really small, like maybe it's a kid's shirt and you want to wear it, you know, so the print is way up here. I have cut off the hem of that and then added a ruffle across this section of it. So it's kind of like closer fitting here, and then there's a little ruffle here below the bust, or kind of, you know, it could even be a little bit lower just depending on how long the original shirt is. But I have done like a ruffle here on the bottom. Yeah, I've done all kinds of piece together different t-shirt things. I've made them into skirts, I've made them into dresses. I've taken t-shirts and put them onto sweatshirts, like a zip front hoodie. I've split it in half and put half on each side, and when you zip it up, you can almost not even see it. There's like this is just like the tip of the iceberg, and it's just a jumping off point. There's so many more things you can do with your old t-shirts. All right, and Lisa says, I learned so much, thanks. Well, thank you, Lisa, for being here, and thank you for saying that. I really appreciate you guys all being here. This was a really fun event, and thank you to Sulky also for supplying the awesome thread. It was really great to work with. And yeah, hopefully I'll see some of you guys tomorrow at my next live event where we're going to be talking about, we're going to be doing some hand stitching, and we're going to be doing a patching and embroidery together. Okay, bye everyone. Thank you so much.